My apartment in Chicago doesn't have holiday decorations. It has a server rack, a single white orchid, and the kind of silence you pay a premium for. At 11:51 p.m., that silence was broken by a single ping. It wasn't a text message. It was an Outlook calendar notification. Subject line: Holiday plans, family. Status, canceled. I opened the details. My father, Richard, didn't even have the courage to call. The note read, "Van, best you stay in the city this year. We need a positive atmosphere for Justin's partners. We'll FaceTime you." He didn't uninvite a daughter. He laid off an employee. Before I tell you exactly what I did next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I want to see who's awake with me. Most women would have called their mother. They would have screamed, cried, or begged for an explanation. But I haven't been most women since my second tour in the desert. The military teaches you that emotion is a liability in the field. When you take fire, you don't ask why the enemy hates you. You assess the trajectory, calculate the distance, and you return fire. I set my coffee mug down on the glass coaster. Precision. No shaking hands. My father wanted a positive atmosphere. He wanted the image of a perfect, successful family without the messy, scarred daughter who actually paid for it. He wanted the check, but not the hand that signed it. I walked over to my desk, the movement silent on the polished concrete floor. I didn't open my contacts. I didn't type out a paragraph of hurt feelings. I opened my secure browser. Richard thought he was managing a family crisis. He didn't realize he was triggering a default clause. I typed a single word in reply to the calendar invite. Not why, not please, just receive. V. Then I hit send. That single word is the most dangerous thing you can say to a narcissist. It gives them nothing. No fuel, no drama, just the terrifying realization that you heard them and you aren't reacting. I logged into the Sterling Estate Trust portal. The two-factor authentication pinged on my wrist. Access granted. I scrolled past the family photos they uploaded to the cloud. Photos of Justin popping champagne, photos of my mother hosting garden parties, photos I wasn't in, and went straight to the folder marked legal. See, for the last 5 years, I had treated my family like a high-risk client. I loved them, yes, but I verified everything. When you work in logistics for private military contractors, you learn that trust is good, but leverage is better. I clicked on a PDF labeled Bridge Loan 2021. The file opened. I stared at the signature at the bottom. Richard Sterling. His handwriting was sweeping and arrogant, the signature of a man who believed the world owed him a living. Next to it was my signature. Small, sharp, efficient. I remembered the night we signed this. He had called it a formality, a technicality to get the bank off his back. He barely glanced at the pages, too busy pouring another scotch and telling me not to embarrass him with my army stories at dinner. He thought he was signing a standard family loan. He was wrong. I scrolled to page 14, the controlling interest clause. It was standard for the kind of distressed asset acquisitions I managed in my day job, but rare for a family home. It stated clearly that in the event of any attempt to exclude the primary lender from the property or any action that diminished the lender's standing, the loan would immediately mature. I leaned back in my chair, the white light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. The anger wasn't hot. It didn't burn. It felt like ice water filling my veins, sharpening my vision. They wanted to exile me, fine, but they forgot one crucial detail about the logistics of war. You never cut supply lines to the person who owns the road. I wasn't just the black sheep of the Sterling family anymore. I was the bank, and the bank was about to call in the debt. I sat there for a long time, the blue light of the monitor washing over my face. In the silence of my apartment, I didn't feel like a daughter who had just been rejected. I felt like an auditor who had just discovered a massive discrepancy in the books. For years, I had treated my place in the Sterling family as an emotional obligation. I showed up, I paid up, I shut up. I treated their affection like a subscription service. I was terrified to cancel, fearing that if I stopped paying the premiums, the tuition checks, the bailouts, the silent nodding during Richard's drunken monologues, I would lose access to the only people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. But looking at that PDF, the truth hit me with the force of a recoil. It hadn't been a relationship. It had been a transaction. And for the first time in my life, I was the one holding the receipt, controlling interest. The words looked sterile on the screen, but they felt heavy in my chest. This document wasn't just a loan agreement, it was a receipt for my own dignity. I had bought my place at their table. I had purchased their pride for exactly $240,000. My phone buzzed again. Another notification, probably my mother Patricia sending a follow-up text to soften the blow. She was the PR department of the family, always spinning Richard's cruelty into stress or concern. I didn't pick up. I didn't even look. I turned my phone face down on the desk. That was the old protocol, the peacekeeping mission. The new protocol was silence. The military teaches you that silence is a weapon. In the field, noise is a vulnerability. Silence is control. By not responding, by not begging, I was removing their ability to triangulate my position. They expected a tantrum. They expected the emotional, desperate Vanessa who craved their validation. They weren't prepared for Sergeant Sterling. I looked back at the document. Paragraph 4, Section B. In the event of voluntary exclusion of the lender from the premises, I ran my finger over the date stamped at the bottom. December 24th, 5 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had signed this document to save them from ruin. I had built the very weapon that was now pointed at their heads. But back then, I wasn't thinking about leverage. I wasn't thinking about hostile takeovers. I was just a 27-year-old kid, fresh off a deployment, desperate to believe that if I wrote a big enough check, my father would finally look at me with something other than disappointment. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon some regret. But there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown, it was a tactical assessment, and they were in the red. To understand why I was about to burn it all down, you have to understand the architecture of the debt. You have to go back to that night. The night the snow was falling, the scotch was pouring, and I learned that for the Stirrings, love was just another line item. We cut to 5 years ago, December 24th. The library of the Sterling estate always smelled the same. Leather, lemon polish, and tonight the sharp, stinging scent of expensive scotch and desperation. Richard was sitting behind his mahogany desk, staring at a letter from the bank. He wasn't the confident patriarch the world saw. He was sweating. His eyes were bloodshot. The entrepreneurial genius had leveraged the estate to fund a tech startup that had just evaporated, taking the family's liquidity with it. He needed $240,000 by Monday morning, or the Sterling jewel would be listed as a foreclosure. I stood on the other side of the desk. I was 27, fresh off a rotation in a conflict zone that most civilians couldn't find on a map. I had money. Hazard pay accumulates fast when you don't have time to spend it. But I wasn't there to give a gift. It's just a bridge loan. Van, Richard slurred, waving a hand dismissively at the foreclosure notice. Just a liquidity crunch. I'll have it back to you in 6 months with interest. I'm doing you a favor." "Really? Better returns than the market." He couldn't even ask for help without making it sound like he was the one offering the opportunity. I pulled the document out of my folder. I had drafted it myself on the flight over. "I'll wire the funds tonight," I said, my voice steady. "But I need security. The market is volatile. Dad, you taught me that." I slid the paper across the desk. He laughed, a short, wet sound. "Security for your father? You think I'm going to run off with your pocket money?" "I think business is business," I replied. "It's a cosigner agreement with a controlling interest clause. If the loan defaults, or if the primary borrower attempts to transfer the title without consent, the cosigner assumes majority equity, 51%. He didn't read it. He didn't even put on his reading glasses. He just saw the check I was holding in my other hand. To him, I wasn't a financial partner. I was just Vanessa, the tomboy who played soldier, the girl who was desperate to be useful. He assumed I was too naive to understand what controlling interest actually meant. "Fine, fine," he muttered, uncapping his long pen. "Whatever makes you feel important, Van. Just do me a favor. When the partners come over for dinner tomorrow, don't bore them with your army stories. Nobody wants to hear about logistics in the desert while they're eating prime rib." He signed his name with a flourish. Scratch, scratch, done. He didn't know he was signing a surrender treaty. I watched the ink dry. In that moment, he thought he was preserving his empire. He thought he was using his daughter's savings to patch a hole in the hull. But he failed to realize that when you take money from a contractor, you play by the contractor's rules. He took the check. I took the document. "Merry Christmas, Dad," I said. He didn't look up. He was already pouring another drink. "Yeah, close the door on your way out. It's a draft in here." That was the architecture of the debt. He sold his freedom for $240,000 because he was too arrogant to believe his own daughter could ever be a threat. Back in the present, I looked at that signature on my screen. It was the only thing in that house that was real. And now, I was going to use it to collect. Back in the present, the blue light of my monitor felt colder. I had the weapon, the document, but I needed to know the target's position. Why cancel Christmas now? Why the sudden need for a positive atmosphere for Justin's partners? I didn't guess. I investigated. The estate's shared cloud drive was my first target. They had revoked my admin privileges 3 years ago, or so they thought. They didn't know I had installed a backdoor root access key the day I paid for the server upgrade. Bypassing the firewall took 12 seconds. I went straight to Richard's recent correspondence, and there it was, an email thread with Henderson Luxury Development Group. The subject line made my stomach turn. Closing scheduled January 1st. I clicked it open. The terms were brutal. Richard was selling the Lake Geneva estate, my estate, for a quick cash injection. The price was 20% below market value. Why the rush? I opened the attachment labeled Liabilities. Justin, my brother, hadn't just made some bad investments. He had leveraged himself into oblivion on a crypto platform that had just collapsed. He owed sharks, not banks. Richard was selling the family home to cover the golden child's gambling debts. They were going to sign the papers on New Year's Day, take the cash, and disappear before I even knew the title had changed hands. But that wasn't the only betrayal. A quick tab switch revealed the credit card statements. A recurring deposit caught my eye. Stripe All, the Sterling Retreat. I ran a search. I found it on a luxury rental site, the Sterling Glamping Experience. They had set up luxury yurts on the South Lawn, the lawn I paid to have landscaped. They were charging $500 a night for strangers to sleep on my property. They had been running an illegal resort for 2 years, generating $15,000 a month in unreported income. And yet, every time I called, they were broke. Every time I visited, the heat was turned down to save money. I picked up my phone and dialed Arthur Blackwood. It was 100 a.m., but Arthur bills at $600 an hour. He picks up. Vanessa. His voice was growly, but alert. They're selling Arthur January 1st, Henderson Group. I see it. He said, the sound of typing in the background. Title search shows a pending transfer request. Van, if they sign that deed, your controlling interest becomes a lawsuit for damages, not a claim on the property. You have to stop the sale. Now I hovered my finger over the execute command on my laptop screen, and I hesitated. This is the part nobody tells you about revenge. It's not a straight line. The daughter part of my brain flared up. I remembered Christmas morning when I was 10, before the money troubles, before the drinking. I remembered Richard teaching me to skate on the frozen lake. If I did this, I wasn't just stopping a sale. I was nuking the bridge. I was making myself an orphan. I stared at the blinking cursor. Why was I hesitating? Then the logistics training kicked in. I recognized this feeling. It wasn't love. It was the sunk cost fallacy. In economics, the sunk cost fallacy is the irrational urge to continue investing in a losing endeavor simply because of how much you've already spent. You keep pouring money into a broken car because you've already paid for the transmission. You keep pouring love into a toxic family because you've already given them 30 years of your life. I realized I had been holding on to stock symbol family even though the company had been bankrupt for a decade. I was trying to protect an investment that had zero return on investment. The memory of skating on the lake that was just a dividend from a long time ago. It didn't change the current balance sheet. Then, Arthur's voice came through the phone. Do we proceed? I looked at the rental listing again. No pets allowed. They wouldn't even let me bring my dog last year. I killed the daughter. The soldier took the chair. Proceed, I said. Draft the injunction, but don't file it yet. I want to serve it personally. Personally, yes. They want a family gathering for the closing. I'm going to give them one. I had given the order to sole owner. It's a technicality, Richard shouted, stepping forward. She just co-signed a loan years ago. It means nothing. Get out, Vanessa. You are trespassing. Trespassing? I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. You can't trespass in a house you own, Richard. I turned to face him. This was it, the moment I had rehearsed in my head 1,000 times. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't waste a single tear. I let the silence stretch until the room felt small. For 5 years, I said, my voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute attention. You have taken my money. You have taken my silence. You accepted the checks I wrote from war zones, but you hated the hand that signed them because it reminded you that you couldn't save yourself. I looked at my mother, who was weeping silently. I looked at Justin, who wouldn't meet my eyes. I was the ghost at your feast, I continued. You wanted the resources, but you didn't want the reminder. You wanted the soldier's money, but you didn't want the soldier. Well, Dad, the ghost is now the landlord. I turned back to Henderson. The property is not for sale. The title is frozen. If you proceed, my lawyer, Mr. Blackwood, will file an injunction before you reach your car. Henderson didn't hesitate. He set his champagne glass down on the table hard. I don't do business with liars, Richard. He walked out. The front door clicked shut. Richard looked around the room. The buyer was gone. The money was gone. The illusion was gone. He slumped onto the sofa, suddenly looking very old and very small. "You ruined us," he whispered. "You vindictive little—" "No," I corrected him. "I audited you." I signaled to the security team waiting in the hall. "Clear the house. You have 30 minutes to pack essentials. The locks change at noon." The eviction process took exactly 4 hours. There were no screaming matches. There were no dramatic last stands. When you strip a narcissist of their audience and their funding, they don't fight. They fold. Richard left with 2 suitcases and a box of his essential scotch. Patricia left with her jewelry and her silence. Justin left with his gaming computer, looking like a child who had finally been told, "No, I didn't throw them onto the street." That would have been emotional, and I don't operate on emotion. I rented them a 2-bedroom condo on the other side of town, prepaid for 6 months. I categorized the expense under severance packages in my ledger. It was a strategic decision to avoid a public relations scandal that could affect the property value. By 3 p.m., the house was empty. I walked through the rooms. The neon war room sign was gone. The illegal glamping yurts on the lawn were being dismantled by a crew I hired an hour ago. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the silence of rejection anymore. It was the silence of a blank canvas. I stood in the dining room, the room where they had toasted to selling my future just that morning. I didn't feel the urge to move my furniture in. I didn't want to sleep in a museum of bad memories. This house had been a symbol of exclusion for 30 years. I wasn't going to live in it. I was going to repurpose it. The blueprints unrolled with a crisp snap on the mahogany table. I had commissioned them months ago, back when I was just dreaming of a way out. I picked up a marker and signed the approval line. 2 weeks later, the contractors arrived. We didn't restore the house to its former glory. We gutted the toxicity and built infrastructure. The war room became a logistics training center. The illegal rental yurts were replaced with meditation gardens. The master suite became a counseling wing, and the sign at the front gate changed. We took down the Sterling estate. In its place, we hung a plaque made of brushed steel, Sterling Reintegration Center. I decided to turn the side of my family's betrayal into a sanctuary for female veterans women transitioning from the battlefield to the boardroom. Women who, like me, had served their country only to come home and feel like they didn't belong. I reclaimed the name. Sterling wouldn't stand for Richard's failed ego anymore. It would stand for resilience. It would stand for the women who paid the price. I stood on the dock as the winter sun began to set over Lake Geneva. The wind was biting, but for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the cold. I looked back at the house, my asset, my project, my victory. I didn't visit Richard and Patricia in their condo. They don't call me. They know that the bank is closed. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, sharp air of ownership. I wasn't a daughter begging for a seat at the table anymore. I was the architect who built a new house. If you have ever had to build your own table because they wouldn't give you a seat, share this story. You are the architect of your own peace.